A narrow stretch of water, dark, crowded, silent, but only on the surface. Beneath it, sonar pulses cut through the depth like whispers of something waiting. Above it, the sky is no longer empty. Fighter jets slice through the air. Warships move in tight formation. Radar systems lock, unlock, lock again. Now imagine standing at the edge of the Strait of Hormuz, the single most critical oil choke point on the planet, watching as one of the largest coordinated U.S. military deployments in years begins to seal it off. On one side, the full weight of the United States military. On the other, Iran, unpredictable, entrenched, and prepared. This is not a drill. This is not speculation. This is happening right now. If you want to understand how we got here, what this blockade actually means, and how it could impact global oil prices, regional stability, and even your daily cost of living, then you need to see the full picture. Because what you're about to hear will show you exactly why this moment could redefine power in the Middle East, trigger a global economic shock, and bring the world closer to a confrontation no one is truly ready for. And that is only the beginning. Welcome to World Brief Daily, where we break down the most critical global events with precision, clarity, and the context you will not find anywhere else. If you want to stay ahead of geopolitical shifts, economic shocks, and military developments as they unfold in real time, make sure you subscribe right now, because you do not want to be the last to know when events like this begin to reshape the world order. Turn on notifications so you never miss a briefing that could directly impact your future. Because what is happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz is not just another headline. It is a rapidly evolving situation with consequences that could reach far beyond the Middle East. Let us start with exactly what happened. In the past 72 hours, the United States has executed one of its most significant rapid force deployments to the Persian Gulf region in recent years, focusing directly on the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows every single day. According to official statements released by U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, multiple U.S. Navy assets, including guided missile destroyers, surveillance aircraft, and carrier strike group elements, have been repositioned to ensure freedom of navigation and regional stability. But here is where it gets more specific. Defense officials speaking to Reuters and CNN confirmed that at least one aircraft carrier strike group has been placed on high alert within operational range of the Gulf. Additional F-35 and FA-18 fighter squadrons have been forward deployed to bases across the region, including in the UAE and Qatar. At the same time, maritime surveillance operations have intensified dramatically. According to Al Jazeera and ABC News, U.S. naval patrols have increased frequency in and around key shipping lanes, with drones and reconnaissance aircraft monitoring Iranian vessel movements around the clock. So what triggered this? The escalation follows a series of confrontations involving Iranian naval units and commercial shipping vessels. Reports from NBC News and the Wall Street Journal indicate that Iran has recently seized or harassed multiple tankers it claims violated its territorial waters, claims that Western officials strongly dispute. In response, Washington has shifted from deterrence messaging to visible enforcement posture. This is no longer just about warnings. This is about presence, physical, immediate, unmistakable. The Pentagon has made that clear. A senior defense official, quoted by CBS, stated that the objective is to prevent further destabilizing actions and ensure that international shipping routes remain open. That sounds measured, controlled, but let us translate that into simple terms. This is a blockade posture, not a formal declaration, not officially labeled as one. But functionally, the United States is now positioning forces to control, monitor, and if necessary, restrict maritime movement in one of the most critical waterways on Earth, and Iran knows it. Iranian state media, citing military officials, warned that any attempt to interfere with its naval operations would be met with a decisive response. Meanwhile, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has reportedly increased its own naval readiness, deploying fast attack craft and missile systems along its southern coastline. So now you have two forces in the same space, with opposing objectives, under rising pressure. And this brings us to the part that should concern everyone, because this is not just about ships and territory. Now here is why this matters more than anyone is telling you. Here is why. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another shipping lane. It is the single most important artery of the global energy system. Every day, between 17 to 20 million barrels of oil pass through this narrow corridor. That is nearly 1 out of every 5 barrels consumed worldwide. Now let us run the numbers slowly because this is where the severity becomes impossible to ignore. If even a partial disruption occurs, just 10%, you are looking at an immediate shock of nearly 2 million barrels per day removed from global supply. According to estimates cited by the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, that kind of shortfall could push oil prices up by $10 to $20 per barrel within days. But here is where it gets more serious. A full-scale closure or sustained blockade scenario. Analysts from Goldman Sachs have warned that oil prices could spike above $150 per barrel in a matter of weeks. Now connect that to your daily life. Higher oil prices do not stay in oil markets. They move fast. Fuel costs rise. Transportation costs rise. Food prices rise. Your grocery bill increases. Your electricity bill increases. Inflation surges again. Just as many economies are trying to stabilize. This is not abstract geopolitics. This is your wallet. But the domino effect does not stop there. Event: U.S. military enforcement posture in the Strait. Leads to increased shipping risk premiums. Leads to insurance costs for tankers skyrocketing. Leads to some shipping companies refusing to transit the area entirely. Leads to supply chain disruption across Asia, Europe, and beyond. And that is before a single shot is fired. But let us zoom in for a moment to one decision. One boardroom. One phone call. A major tanker operator, faced with rising insurance costs and military tension, decides to reroute or halt shipments. That decision alone can remove hundreds of thousands of barrels per day from circulation. Multiply that across dozens of companies. Now you are looking at a systemic disruption, and there is another layer most people are missing: the memory of past crises. In 2019, after a series of tanker attacks near the Strait, oil prices jumped nearly 15% in a single day. That was without a full military buildup like we are seeing now. Markets remember. Investors react faster the second time. And here is where the pressure becomes political. Countries that depend heavily on Gulf oil, India, Japan, South Korea, are suddenly exposed. Governments face rising domestic pressure as fuel costs climb, protests, subsidy demands, political instability. At the same time, Iran is under severe economic strain due to sanctions. Its oil exports are already restricted. This waterway is one of its last strategic levers, which means both sides have something to lose and something to prove. Time is not on their side, because the longer this military posture remains in place, the higher the risk of miscalculation. One misread signal, one aggressive maneuver, one accidental collision, and suddenly this shifts from economic pressure to open confrontation. And that brings us to the part of this story that most people are not seeing. Before we go any further, if you are getting value from this breakdown and want clear, real-time analysis of global events that actually impact your life, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because we are covering this story as it develops, and the situation is changing fast. Now let us talk about the dimension of this crisis that almost no one is discussing. Here is the dimension of this story that most coverage is not paying attention to, and it could be the most important factor of all. This is not just about a U.S. military deployment. This is not just about Iran asserting control. This is about control over perception and the strategic use of escalation without crossing the line into full-scale war. What most analysts are missing is this: both sides may actually be operating within a controlled escalation framework. Let me explain. Everything we told you in the first part is true. The ships are there. The aircraft are deployed. The tension is real. But here is what makes it more complicated than it first appears. Neither Washington nor Tehran necessarily wants a direct military confrontation. According to assessments cited by International Crisis Group and commentary from regional analysts interviewed by Al Jazeera, both sides have strong incentives to push right up to the edge without going over it. Why? Because escalation itself has value. For the United States, a visible military presence reinforces its role as the guarantor of global shipping security. It sends a message not just to Iran, but to allies in the Gulf. We are here, we are watching, and we can act. For Iran, controlled confrontation serves a different purpose. Under heavy economic sanctions, Tehran uses maritime pressure as leverage. Seizing or harassing vessels is not random, it is calculated. It reminds the world that Iran still holds influence over the Strait of Hormuz, even if its economy is constrained. But let us zoom in for a moment to one person, one decision, one room. Inside Iran's leadership circles, particularly within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, naval operations are not just military actions, they are political signals. Each move is designed to test boundaries, provoke reactions, and measure response thresholds. And here is the twist. What appears to be chaos may actually be a pattern. Since 2019, there has been a recurring cycle: tanker incident, Western response, temporary de-escalation, renewed pressure. This cycle allows both sides to demonstrate strength without committing to war. But cycles can break, and this one is under more strain than ever before. Why? Because the current deployment scale is significantly larger. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal and CNN, the number of assets now positioned in the region exceeds previous standoffs in both visibility and readiness level. That changes the equation. More assets mean more interactions. More interactions mean more chances for error. And here is where most Western coverage ignores a critical factor: internal pressure within Iran. Iran's economy has been under prolonged strain. Inflation has surged. Currency value has fluctuated sharply. Public dissatisfaction has, at times, spilled into protests. In that environment, external confrontation can serve as a unifying narrative. It shifts focus outward. It reframes economic hardship as resistance, which means de-escalation is not just a military decision, it is a political risk. Now flip the perspective. For the United States, backing down after such a visible deployment also carries consequences. It could signal weakness, it could undermine alliances, it could embolden not just Iran, but other actors watching closely. So both sides are locked into a posture where appearing strong is almost as important as being safe. That is a dangerous balance, because it increases the likelihood of what strategists call inadvertent escalation, a situation where neither side intends to start a conflict, but both create conditions where one becomes unavoidable. And this brings us to a deeper truth. This is not just about ships in a strait. This is about the limits of controlled tension in a world where miscalculation travels faster than diplomacy. And that brings us to what this actually looks like on the ground. Now let us talk about what this actually looks like on the ground. At the center of this deployment is a U.S. Navy carrier strike group, built around a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, supported by guided missile destroyers, equipped with the Aegis combat system. These ships are not just symbolic. Each destroyer can carry dozens of Tomahawk cruise missiles, capable of striking targets hundreds of miles inland with precision. Alongside them, U.S. Air Force assets, including F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters and F/A-18 Super Hornets, are now operating from bases across the Gulf, including installations in Qatar and the UAE. These aircraft bring advanced surveillance, electronic warfare, and rapid strike capability. But here is where it gets more complex. The United States is not just deploying firepower, it is deploying layered control. Maritime patrol aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon are conducting continuous surveillance over the Strait of Hormuz, tracking vessel movements in real time. Drones provide persistent aerial coverage. Satellite systems feed constant data back to command centers. This creates what military planners call a situational awareness dominance. In simple terms, the U.S. can see almost everything that moves. Now compare that to Iran. Iran does not match the U.S. in conventional naval power, not even close. But that is not how Iran fights. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy relies on asymmetric warfare, fast attack boats, coastal missile batteries, naval mines, swarm tactics. Instead of one large fleet, Iran uses dozens of small, highly maneuverable vessels that can approach quickly, strike, and disperse. These boats are often armed with anti-ship missiles and torpedoes. Then there are the coastal defense systems. Iran has deployed anti-ship missile platforms along its southern coastline, many of them mobile and difficult to detect. Missiles like the Noor and Qadr can target vessels transiting the strait from significant distances. And then there is the most dangerous variable of all: mines. Naval mines are cheap, simple, and extremely effective. Even a limited mining operation in key shipping lanes could halt traffic almost immediately. Clearing those mines would take time during which global oil flows could be severely disrupted. Now imagine this scenario. A U.S. destroyer escorts a commercial tanker through the strait. Iranian fast boats approach at high speed. Radar systems activate. Warnings are issued. One boat gets too close. A commander makes a decision. Seconds later, gunfire. Was it intentional? Was it a miscalculation? In that moment, it does not matter, because escalation would be immediate. And here is the worst-case scenario that keeps strategists awake. A single incident spirals into a broader engagement. The United States targets Iranian coastal missile sites. Iran responds by launching missiles at U.S. assets and potentially regional bases. Shipping halts. Oil markets surge. Regional allies are pulled in. And suddenly, what started as a defensive deployment becomes a multi-theater conflict. But here is where it gets even more complicated, because there is another player watching this very closely. Let us pull the camera back because there is a second player whose stakes may ultimately exceed everyone else. That player is China. Here is the number that changes everything. Roughly 40% of China's imported oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Let that sink in. Nearly half of the energy fueling the world's second-largest economy and its manufacturing engine depends on the stability of a single narrow waterway that is now under rising military tension. Now let us run the numbers slowly. China imports over 10 million barrels of crude oil per day. A significant portion of that supply originates from Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and transits through Hormuz. Even a partial disruption could remove millions of barrels from China's supply chain. What happens next? Refineries slow down, industrial output drops, export capacity weakens, and this is where it connects directly to you. If Chinese manufacturing slows, global supply chains tighten. Electronics, machinery, consumer goods, prices rise, delivery times stretch. This is not just a regional issue. This is a global economic pressure point. But here is where it gets strategically complicated. China has maintained a delicate balance in the Middle East. On one hand, it has deep economic ties with Gulf countries. On the other, it has cultivated a working relationship with Iran, particularly in energy and infrastructure agreements. Beijing does not want conflict, but it also does not want to appear dependent or vulnerable, and right now it is both. Because any U.S.-led enforcement posture in the Strait effectively places a critical part of China's energy lifeline under the shadow of American military control. That creates a strategic contradiction. China wants stability, but not at the cost of reliance on U.S. security guarantees. China wants access, but without exposure. So what are its options? Diplomatic pressure, quietly urging de-escalation behind the scenes. Energy diversification, increasing imports through alternative routes like pipelines from Russia or Central Asia, but those cannot fully replace maritime flows. Strategic reserves. China has built large stockpiles of oil, but those are temporary buffers, not permanent solutions. And here is the deeper issue. This situation highlights a structural vulnerability in China's global position. For all its economic power, a critical portion of its energy supply still depends on choke points it does not control, and that is a long-term strategic concern. Now imagine if tensions escalate further. China is forced into a difficult position: support Iran and risk alienating Gulf partners and escalating tensions with the United States, or distance itself from Iran and risk losing influence and energy leverage. Either way, it loses something, and that is why this crisis is not just about the United States and Iran. It is about the balance of power in a multipolar world. And this brings us to where all of these threads converge. This is where all the threads converge. Right now, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is balanced on a knife's edge. Military assets are in position, economic pressure is building, political stakes are rising. From here, there are only two realistic paths forward. Scenario A, escalation. A single incident, an intercepted vessel, a misinterpreted maneuver, a warning shot that goes too far, triggers a rapid chain reaction. The United States responds with targeted strikes on Iranian naval assets or coastal missile systems. Iran retaliates using fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, or even limited mining operations in the strait. Shipping traffic halts almost immediately. Oil prices surge past critical thresholds. Global markets react within hours. Regional allies begin mobilizing. What started as a controlled standoff becomes an active conflict zone. And here is the key point: escalation would not stay contained. It would spread, politically, economically, and potentially militarily, across the region. Scenario B, controlled de-escalation. Back-channel diplomacy intensifies. Through intermediaries, possibly Gulf states or European actors, both sides begin to step back without losing face. Naval presence remains, but rules of engagement tighten. Incidents are avoided rather than provoked. Shipping continues, but under heightened security. Markets stabilize, but remain fragile. Tensions do not disappear, they freeze. But here is where it gets critical. Both scenarios require restraint, and restraint is hardest to maintain under pressure. The longer forces remain in close proximity, the higher the risk that one unpredictable moment overrides strategic calculation. The next 72 hours will be decisive. Will Washington hold its current posture or escalate further? Will Tehran test the boundaries or pull back? Will a third party intervene diplomatically, or remain on the sidelines? And most importantly, will this remain a standoff or become something far more dangerous? Let us bring all of these threads together. A major U.S. military deployment has positioned significant naval and air assets near the Strait of Hormuz in response to rising maritime tensions involving Iran. According to reporting from outlets such as Reuters and CNN, the stated objective is to secure international shipping routes and deter further disruptions. At the same time, Iran, through its naval forces and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has increased its maritime posture, raising the risk of close-range encounters in one of the world's most critical energy corridors. The economic stakes are enormous. Even partial disruption to oil flows through the strait could trigger global price spikes, supply chain instability, and inflationary pressure across multiple economies. Meanwhile, major global actors like China face indirect exposure due to their dependence on Gulf energy imports. Behind the visible military positioning lies a deeper dynamic: controlled escalation, signaling, and strategic deterrence. But this balance is fragile, and history shows that fragile balances can break quickly. The question is not whether tensions exist. The question is how long they can remain contained without tipping into something far more destabilizing. That is what we do here at Crises Reporting. We break down global events in real time, cut through the noise, and give you the context behind the headlines so you understand what is really at stake. If you have been watching until this point, make sure you are subscribed and notifications are turned on, because this situation is still developing, and the next update could change everything we just discussed. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is happening right now in the world, because moments like this do not stay isolated for long. This is Crises Reporting. Stay informed, stay ahead.